Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, this is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice because we can't pay our bills with that, but we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit, and always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you. Hey everyone, as promised, December crept up on us again this year. I gave you warning all throughout the year that this was coming, so don't act surprised now, but this is a great month. We have some great guests coming on. One of my favorite people, Ben Bickman from Health Code, who happens to be one of the sponsors, is joining us. And I think you'll really enjoy hearing what he has to say. Health Code, great stuff to help you get back on track or to minimize the damage during the holidays. Tons of shakes and recipes. Go to Get Health, GETHLTH.com. And the discount code is METHEALTH, METHEALTH. So go there, stock up for next year when you're trying to get back on the wagon and get back into those pants and shirts that are too tight. We don't want to lose buttons this year, guys. We gotta really do it next year in 2024, big year. Also Keto Mojo, thank you so much. They're doing such great work, and go to their website, keto-mojo.com. They have a ton of information there, old talks, just a lot of information. Also, at the end of the year, they also have health savings account. If you have money in those accounts, you could use that. In most cases, check with your advisor, but you could use that for Keto Mojo to see what your ketones and sugars are looking like at the end of the year. So everyone, thanks for your support. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. This is fun. I got a guy I don't know what the words are, but as you know, I just interviewed Jason Fung, who we agree on just about everything, and Ben Bickman and all these things. So it's crazy when we come across people who may have a different background, a different worldview, maybe a different religion, maybe different politics, and you start saying, "Oh, how much do we have in common?" And I think this is a dangerous thing because it's coming off the heels. Last night I was listening to Jimmy Dore, who's on the left, more so I would say, and Tucker Carlson on the right, and they're both having a reasonable discussion. Go, yeah, I see it the same way you do, right? These things, right? We may not agree on everything, but they're having a civil discussion. And just recently this week, Zuby, who was on this podcast a while back, who's a really smart British Christian, Ivy League trained rapper, right, of all the dang things, but he went on Piers Morgan, and I watched all of his viewers attack him for having a reasonable discussion with someone that he totally disagrees with. But the scary part about me and Mike Davis, my guest today, guy in Austin, his name keeps coming up all the time when I have people on. And if you say two people who are kind of look at the world maybe differently, or should look at the world differently, we say we agree on all this stuff. It's kind of a crazy thing when you find a common ground. Maybe we're both unreasonable to be reasonable with each other. I don't know. But Mike, welcome, man. It's so great to have you back.
Thanks very much, Brian. It's a pleasure to talk with you. And before we get going too much, I want to let you know what a thrill it is for a guy who's just a rank and file member of the low carb community to be invited back to talk to you after you've had Ben Bickman on multiple times, Jason Fung. I mean, I still remember that this is the thing about the low carb community that's amazing. I still remember on Twitter, I was joking around with Sean Baker for months, and then just a DM shows up where he invites me to lunch. Why is Sean Baker inviting me to lunch? I'm just a guy on Twitter. I made a video trying to explain the value of Georgia Eads' approach to anti-nutrients to Dr. Eric Berg on YouTube. And I wasn't surprised when Berg replied because I was kind of challenging his way of thinking. But then Georgia Ede came into the comments to kind of help with that stuff. And it's just, these are people who I'm not into hero worship or anything, but I mean, these are influencers. These are important people. And when they just take the time to socialize with people like me or to back us up in arguments, I don't know that influencers like you understand what it means to the rank and file like us for all of y'all to be so accessible. Ken Berry is also accessible. I mean, just the number of people who go out of their way to be kind to the regulars in this community has to be much higher than is typical of the average community. And I think that reflects real well on us and maybe reflects the incredible mental health benefits to be gained from eating correctly.
Yeah, I think there's truth to that. I think it's funny thing about Georgia Eat. I was at a conference and I just learned. It was my first conference ever. I didn't know anything, and like it was raining. I remember I'd run in. There was like one seat open. I'm like, I'll just sit there. And I look, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's Georgia Eat next to me. I'm like, oh my gosh, and she was so kind and nice and decent, and she's such a decent, good person, right? It's such a and I know these. That's why it's so hard when I see people get attacked, like Jason Fung. Like I know him as a person. Like that's why I want to have him on the podcast to say, okay, what would you do if you weren't doing this? Oh, I'd fix jet engines. That's what I wanted to do. And Ben Bickman was going to go do other stuff. Like, wow, how would the world be different if those two guys don't go into what they're doing? And I think part of it's and I think from an atheist perspective or a Christian perspective, we're used to people getting upset with our point of view. Right. I could be with a bunch of atheists and they'll attack. Like, as a matter of fact, that's one thing I greatly appreciate about you. And that's what got you on my radar was like all the atheists, for some reason, when I said keep the hope, keep the faith, they want to attack me on all this stuff, like, this fantasy that you believe and all this crazy stuff. I was like, wow. And you were the voice of reason. Go, hey, guys, be reasonable with this guy. Like, here, he has a point here, whatever it is. Like, to be able to say, okay, I'm going to, and that's what people don't understand. That's why when I interviewed Sean Baker, it totally changed my point of view of him. Because at first I go, this guy's just crazy. And he just like trying to get publicity. But when I interviewed him and I knew that he was a surgeon working on enemy soldiers, right? He goes, I don't care what they do. I'm fixing the person in front of me, right? And having bombs go off around him, he goes, no, we're not leaving this guy to die. American soldiers not going to die on my watch because I'm afraid of a bomb going off. We all go or none of us go, And when you see integrity like that, you go, okay, these are the people I want to be around. And you showed your integrity that way. And I think that's why these people reach back to you because you're reasonable and go, okay, here's a reasonable argument. Let's talk about it, right? Here's a counterpoint to what you're saying. Defend what you believe, because if we're not challenged on what we believe or don't believe, like we never like if we're in that echo chamber and everyone agrees with you all the time, you're not going to grow that way.
Right. And it's easy to have your echo chamber challenged, your echo chamber perspective challenged, if it's being challenged with real information from the real world and you're receptive to reviewing real information from the real world. I don't have any problem communicating with anyone who's willing to engage demonstrable facts. Here are the things. Here's what's actually happening. The difficulty comes with people who, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on how you're navigating this. The people who brainwash themselves or are brainwashed, and I'm not entirely certain. I don't know where you are on this. I'm not entirely certain to what degree people are brainwashed against their will. That is, I kind of think you can only be brainwashed into something if you're already inclined to let yourself, those blind spots that are so important to preserving your worldview, there has to be something in it for you to block those out, for you to keep blocking them out. And so I think you're a Christian, forgiving person. It's much easier, I think, for you to forgive people than it is for me. I think I bear grudges. I think this is something I envy Christians for. I bear grudges, and maybe I'm too judgmental, and maybe I'm wrong that people are brainwashed because they want to be, and not because nefarious forces, not entirely, because nefarious forces want them to be. And I just wonder, that it's not just nutrition, it's not just COVID, it's everything. Everywhere I detect brainwashing, it's like, well, you're playing along with that to a certain degree. And I think anyone who's who's got some basic sense of human psychology would say we're all subject to confirmation bias. I don't doubt that that's true. We're all subject to cognitive biases of our own. I don't doubt that's true. But I think what drives those biases may, in many cases, be flaws in the way we process information that are rooted in selfishness, a desire to protect ourselves from things we don't want to know. And I don't think it's unreasonable of me to make that accusation of people who are consistently getting things wrong and ignoring demonstrable truths. And I wonder how do you handle that? Like, you've got a loved member of your family, a beloved friend, a beloved acquaintance who's getting it wrong, and you think, man, you're brainwashed, and I'm sorry for you. I know you're a victim of brainwashing to some degree, but I'm a little bit mad at you. How do you respond to that kind of
Yeah,
quandary?
I totally agree with you. I mean, I just had a hypnotist on, and we had this discussion about, and he was telling a story about when he was first training in hypnotism, and he does clinical hypnosis, which is different than, going up on stage and acting like a chicken and doing crazy stuff. But he said he was observing, and this lady, the hypnotist that he was observing, told the lady, "Hey, when your husband comes on stage, you're gonna see him, and you're gonna cuss him up and down. You're gonna remember all the bad stuff he's ever said to you, all the bad stuff he's ever done, and you're just gonna cuss him up and down like a sailor, right?" And she's hypnotized. And so he comes out, and you can see her getting furious and red, and like she's just really upset, and she hasn't cussed the whole time. She talks reasonably to him, right? And so afterwards, the guy went up to her that was observing and said, "Hey, were you not hypnotized?" She goes, "No, I was hypnotized." She goes, "I was so mad at my husband. I was frustrated with all these old arguments we had that he was wrong and all this stuff." And he said, "How come you didn't cuss then?" She said, "I don't cuss." So part of it, and he was making the point, is that if it's against your core beliefs, like if it's against my core beliefs to go kill people, he can't hypnotize me to go kill people. You cannot, or if you don't believe that smoking is bad for you and you think it's not a big deal, then you're not going to quit smoking with hypnosis. So you do have to buy in. You're right. You have to buy into a certain degree. And I think the psychology I've seen in doctors, it's astounding. Like you can see you do an intervention. 2 days later, the person has a heart attack, stroke, dies, has neurologic damage, and they can't say, it might be that in the history of medicine, if I give you an antibiotic today and in 2 days you get a rash all over, I go, it's probably from the antibiotic, so stop it. Right?
Right.
It's just
First thing
common
you do is
sense.
try
If
that.
you if you alter one variable and then you have bad outcomes, you have to say, oh, every time I alter this variable, I get a bad outcome. Maybe I'm not going to do that anymore. Right? Every time I yell at my wife, I'm sleeping on the couch that night. Okay, maybe I shouldn't do that anymore. We learn human nature is that. But I think the hardest thing, especially for physicians that I'm seeing, is that they cannot admit that they harm people. They can't admit it to themselves because they don't want to believe like, oh, I caused this by my recommendation because I blindly trusted leader. And this is where, from an atheist perspective, I get it because you go, okay, these religious cults, what happened? You give all you just trust this person to tell you the truth, and they tell you go blow yourself. I mean, I'm telling you, I've talked to one of my buddies, one of my patients was a contractor in Afghanistan. I was like, oh my gosh, wasn't it scary? And he said, Brian, you want to believe like most of these people, like if you give them a job, like they're not going to blow you up. Like they're not fanatical, but what happens is their leaders tell them, here's what you have to do in order to be a good whatever, right? Whatever religion you want to be, you have to go. And you look at it now. I mean, right now it's a hot topic, like looking at what's happening in Gaza, right? It's horrific either way. If I see either side, if I see the kids getting killed, it's like that's inhumanity either way. You're not supposed to kill kids, right? And when women and old people. So either way there's atrocities, so both sides can say how bad the other side is, but it doesn't make you any better just because you're pointing out the bad sides of other people, right?
I almost sent you a photo of our house from the front yard because my wife wanted to do something about the Gaza Israeli thing. And what we really don't want to do is fuel the fire by further polarizing people.
Correct.
And so I wanted you to show how an atheist in Austin decorates his house for Christmas. And what we have is a huge banner on our front porch that says "Peace on Earth" with a dove on it. That's what we. That's where you want to be. And something that I know you were raised religious. I was raised
No, I
Methodist.
wasn't.
Oh, you weren't. You weren't. Okay, so you came to it. So we had
A
very
cute girl
yet another
converted me,
difference.
man. My
Yeah.
wife.
Okay, so good for you on that. Your experience in your childhood is very different than mine. I was raised Methodist, and we were definitely spoon-fed what I would call now, looking back on it, Zionist propaganda, in that I grew up thinking if you are a Palestinian, that is ethnically, if you are a Palestinian, you are a terrorist. That's what those two things, those two terms were interchangeable to me in my childhood. And it was not even remotely possible to think about privileging terrorist Palestinian lives, valuing those lives as much as a Jewish life. That was an unthinkable thing. And I remember getting to college, and this is one of those things where you just have to be open to people and let them challenge your views. And it wasn't a Palestinian, it was not even a Middle Eastern person who challenged me. It was a Malaysian kid. I was studying Greek at UT Austin one summer, and this Malaysian kid who was just there for the summer, just like I was, asked me what I thought about the Jews in Israel. And I thought, well, the Jews were terribly persecuted by Hitler and they need their own homeland. And Israel's a great idea. And he says, well, what about the Palestinians? And I said, well, they're a bunch of terrorists. I was a 19-year-old. I mean, I was not, I'm maybe 17. I was college age. I was young, but not young enough to excuse the stupidity of that remark. And that guy changed that Malaysian kid changed my view on something that I had never examined instantly, because he had demonstrable facts at his disposal. And I was living in a fantasy world where all Palestinians were terrorists. That's a crazy thing to think, but it's nevertheless, what I thought as a sheltered Texas Methodist kid. And this guy opened my eyes, and my eyes were available to be opened. And I just think whatever else we do, whether we're people of faith or people who lack faith, we need to remain curious. We need to be aware that other people don't see the world differently than we do just to spite us. They see the world differently for a reason. Maybe it's a bad reason, but maybe it isn't. And maybe the reason I saw things wrong was because I was mistaken, which certainly in the Palestinian case I was.
Yeah, and it's a hard thing because for me, I've traveled the world, I've been all over, and I've thought about it from this person's perspective. I was in Vietnam on a medical trip, and one of my first medical trips where I said, okay, there's no way I'm going to Vietnam, and then somehow I'll say God put on my heart like you're going to Vietnam, and I go there, and it's amazing, unbelievably eye-opening, because I'm sitting there and like talking to people and looking at like they just want to raise their rice and take care of their family and be like, they don't want to be in a war. They don't care who their government is at some point. Yeah, they just, whatever, you have to go pay your taxes or do whatever, but just live my life. And I think that's what at that moment, I thought, man, like how many lives were lost over here? And these people don't want to, they really don't, like they're forced to go do stuff. I mean, my family heritage is Nazi Germany. My grandfather, because he didn't believe in the Nazi way, was sent to the Eastern Front to fight Russia and die in the snow and probably froze to death, And you started looking, it's like, man, there were good people on both sides and all sides. And I've been to MS-13 area in Guatemala, Zona 18 for anyone in Guatemala. And these guys are broken. They're broken. They had no father figures. They had no life. The gang is their family, and they kill, and that's what they were taught. And when they realize what they're doing is wrong, man, you should see how these people are. They're human beings too, right? And we can think of them as animals, and many are animals and do atrocious things. And you go, so there's good in there somewhere. There's peace, and there's like, when you see redemption and you see someone change their life, and you go, man, that's what for religion. When I started seeing friends who are like the worst of the worst become like loving everyone and being kind, I'm like, what happened? This is not normal, right? For me. And so, but then I have guys like you come across, I go, okay, this guy loves his wife and he's happy and he's kind to people and he's doing all this stuff and he doesn't have the same beliefs. Can someone with different beliefs than me have a good life and be happy and content? I think so, right? You kind of ruin my paradigm to say you have to only believe this, and right. So, and it's funny, I don't even have a dove on my front and world peace on the front of my house, right? I've just got a bunch of Christmas lights up, but you go, yeah, because I think really we all want peace. We all want to like be heard and understood and go, okay, just because you were born, like even now, like we can experience it in a way because we're both in this, I'm worse off than you because I'm also Christian, but also white male, right? You have this privilege and all of a sudden you're supposed to be ashamed of who you are. Like I wouldn't want my black friends to be ashamed of who they are. You are who you are, right? With the
Right.
content of character, are you a decent person or not? And that's what I want to judge people on, and then
Sure.
say, okay, is this a decent, nice person? I know some brilliant scientists who are total idiots in real life. You know what I mean? I go, I don't, I don't like you as a person. I agree with what you're saying because you're doing stuff that I agree with, but I don't like you as a person. And like you said, in the low carb community, I have not come across anyone who I don't like as a person. Like you talk about Professor Noakes, Gary Fedke, like all these guys are just salt of the earth, the kindest, most decent. And they say, and the other thing is they're not afraid to stand up for what they believe, right? What they see.
100%.
Like they're ready to say, hey, I know everyone says this, but they're wrong. And here's why. Here's my data. And then they obviously won in court and everything was shown to be legit on their side. But it's hard because you go, okay, what happens if all of a sudden go, oh my gosh, I believe? Then what are all your friends are like, what the heck happened to Mike? He's lost his marbles, right?
Well, one of the things it's that's important, but also I think the generosity of spirit is something that I can't let go without comment. The generosity of spirit of a person like Jason Fung, who talks strictly about the science, not a lot about himself. But when I found my way to low carb in 2017, there wasn't a lot of YouTube stuff going on about keto. It was by 2018, by late 2018, it would be a whole different world. But when I started, there wasn't a lot of stuff to find. And so I was consuming anything I could find. And what I found incredible was here's Jason Fung giving a speech here. Here's Jason Fung giving an interview here. Here's Jason Fung giving an interview. There's all these free interviews from podunk, nobody watch, not many people watch them podcasts that Jason Fung had gone on in those early years to promote fasting and ketosis. And Tim Noakes, exact same thing. You see that guy. This is a hugely respected academic. He's not just an academic who's making it, who's getting by. A hugely respected academic with an incredibly powerful research track record, who took time out of his schedule to go on podcast after podcast. I would see him on podcasts where the number of subscribers was in the hundreds. And there's Tim Noakes taking the call, talking to the person. That is someone who knows that they have something important to share and that it's not easy to disseminate the message, and that message gets out not simply through its intellectual coherence, not simply through its demonstrability, but through human connections. Human connections are huge, and that's why I think it's real important that you do shows like yours where you talk to the bigwigs and the ordinary people, and you're a doctor giving your time and expertise to people who don't have any expertise at all. Nothing that I have to offer about low carb can be considered anything other than experience. It certainly isn't expertise.
Well, it's life experience, right? You have life experience, you change your life, you feel better, you're having good relationships, all those things. And a lot of what you're saying, I just love it because it just makes me think. I look back and I go, okay, a lot of like Gary Fedke is an example. They told him because he was a threat to the system that, okay, you could do what you want in your clinic, just don't talk about it publicly. Because we don't want this word getting out to other people. Because if a lot of people start doing this, it's going to hurt our industry, right? It's going to hurt cereal. Like you're telling people not to eat cereal for breakfast, and that's what everyone's doing now. Because yeah, but they're getting diabetes, they're having all these complications. If we get rid of that and they eat eggs, they're going to do better, right?
Right.
So they tried to quash it. Now, if you look at history and you go back, I'll use Jesus as an example. He was a threat to the establishment. He came and goes, hey, look, you guys are religious people and you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, and you're memorizing all that, doing all your ritual stuff, but you're not living your life the way you should be and being kind and decent to people, right? So he was a threat. So what do? They try to quash his movement. Well, his movement kind of picked up a little bit, even though it was a fad religion at the time, right? All these times in the history of man, when they try to suppress the truth, it eventually comes out. Like this whole thing with what we experienced the last couple of years, the truth will come out. You can't
Yes.
hide the body counts. You can't hide all cause mortality. You can't hide it. You can for a while, but sooner or later it comes out. So you better dang well be able to say, oh, let me readjust my opinion. Just like other people I respect, Steve Malator, the same thing. He came out super pro intervention. Later on, he goes, oh, I looked at the data. Peter McCullough came out very pro and looked at the data. So when you can analyze and change your point of view, if you have someone like Professor Noakes who came out saying carb load, carb load, carb load. Then all of a sudden go, uh-oh, my friends are being damaged by what I told them 20 years ago. Okay,
Let
I
me
was wrong.
publicly tear these pages out of this book to let
Yeah,
people
I
know
was
I
wrong.
don't believe this anymore. Yes, and it it is every single one of us is wrong from time to time. And you were mentioning earlier about how we over the white male privilege stuff, and what we do with Thomas Jefferson is say, well, you were a slave owner, and therefore I don't want to see what's valuable in the Declaration of Independence. That's crazy. That's nuts.
That's
And
exactly it. Let's rip down the statues and go, let's see. The guy wasn't perfect. Like, who was perfect? I just tweeted about that. I'm like, I quote Mark Twain, and someone go, well, did you know he did this? What about this? Well, Martin Luther King, do you know he had an affair on his wife? It's like, well, what he said doesn't, to judge people by the content of their character. Let's talk about that. Let's not talk about what he did in his personal life, whatever, right? No one's perfect. If they, none of us can go up there and go, I can't cast the first stone, right? I can't, because then you look and you go, okay. And I think, I think the thing that has brought a lot of us on the left and right and whatever together, it's like, okay, like I would stand with you. We'd go have a glass of wine or a beer, whatever we're gonna do, and then have some steak and watch both sides get thrown in jail for being corrupt. Like, it's the corruption that we don't like. I don't care if he's a R or D or whatever, independent. I don't care who you are. Like, we don't like injustice on both sides. Right. So for me, like when you ask me about how I feel about those things like vengeance and things like that, it's like, okay, vengeance is mine, not mine, but God's, right? So I go, okay, and it was so funny. I was thinking about in the shower this morning. I was thinking, you know what? It's got to be hard for my atheist friends, because for me, I go, okay, you're going to pay one way or another. If you do bad stuff and you're unjust, at some point you have to answer for that. Right. So if I don't, like, sometimes, like, I always hated the idea of hell, and you go, some people, I kind of get it now. Like, if you're evil and you torture people and you're killing little babies and you're doing bad stuff, you go, okay, there's got to be a penalty at some point. You can't, even if you have friends in high positions protecting you, those guys have to answer to someone above them, right? So that's why it's like when I look at it, I go, okay, so I'm not going to worry about, I'm not going to get vengeance on these people. I'm not going to go burn down someone's house or do crazy stuff. But you go, okay. But I think there's a penalty on earth too. If you're nasty, you lied, you hurt people, you do these things, I think you have to go to bed at night, right? And those people don't sleep well, right? And they know they're ripping people off and misleading, instead of just saying, "Hey, look, here's what I believe. I'm gonna throw it out there. This is what my agenda is," right?
right, I suspect there's some of that, but I did tweet you about this very question concerning Henry Kissinger. Like, from my atheist perspective, he got off scot free. I mean, he had a great, powerful, enriched life. He was a terrible human being for the entire 55 years of my existence, and it's all fine. I mean, there is no karmic settlement of the debts in my view. It's just we we pay the price for having allowed that. The punishment that should have been visited on Kissinger is instead being visited on us, his enablers. In much the same way, I don't find a lot of people interested in the American Civil War anymore, but in much the same way that Abe Lincoln saw that we had to suffer for the sins of our you can't punish the people who made slavery happen in the U.S. They're gone. So what can you publish? Who can you punish? Americans alive in the 1860s. That's who you can punish. And so that's who, in Lincoln's rhetoric, God did punish. And what Lincoln really believed spiritually, I don't know. I mean, it's very sketchy. But certainly that rhetoric worked with the American public, and I think there's value in that idea of having a moral sense of a society that yes, we can behave well or we can behave badly. And the reason not to behave badly is not that anyone can stop us, it's that we'll be punished in some way. And I suspect you could see that the unraveling of the U.S. power structure of U.S. empire around the world right now, the loss of the petrodollar, et cetera. This is the pigeons of Kissinger coming home to roost. I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's, from my perspective, I look at it from that perspective. You take God out of everything. You take God out of everything. And then things become, as a matter of fact, I would love to hear your opinion on this one. Is this guy that's a Christian, military guy, ex-military, went in and beheaded they had a altar to Satan in Iowa State Capitol or something like that. And he went in and beheaded all these people. He's a hero. I was like, well, is he? I don't know. I don't know that. Like when you go and destroy public property because you don't agree with that. I mean, and we talk about, and he's saying, look, there's separation of church and state. That's church. It's atheist. You're worshiping atheist because if they would have put a statue of Jesus there, then the other side gets all worked up, right? So it's like it's amazing how, like, depending on your perspective, you can go, okay, he's on my side, so I'm gonna condone everything they do.
Well, okay. So what's weird about that is I had a friend in junior high who was called an atheist devil worshiper by the other kids in school, and I don't know if you hear what's wrong with that as a charge immediately, but it was obvious to him and funny to him. I'm an atheist. I don't worship anything, certainly not Satan. And yeah, so my atheist leanings do make me sympathetic to the separation of church and state. I do like that idea. But at the same time, I'm aware that we have Christmas celebrations attended by presidents and governors and mayors and Christmas tree lighting ceremonies and things that happen as part of a society. And I think those are questions that you can't answer, that cannot most productively be answered, in my opinion, on some sort of basic abstract principle. Should we have church separated from state? I think the extent to which those things help a society have a coherent identity. I don't have to believe in Christ to accept the power of Christmas. I think that's obvious. I know I have a lot of Jewish friends who celebrate Christmas. There's nothing unusual about that. My extended family includes a Jewish family. Those kids like Christmas, and that's not necessarily. So I guess what I'm struggling with is I don't know whose side I would be expected to be on in this argument. I'm certainly not for the idea. I remember when some organization, I'm blanking on the name of it, in the Middle East started defacing statues of some kind of some religion they didn't approve of, and like a Buddhist statue had been up for thousands of years and they destroyed it, and it's their religion, it's part of their culture. We're getting rid of these false gods, and there's a part of me who doesn't have a stake in Buddhism or Islam that says, yeah, but that's been there a long time. That's part of our human heritage, and now you're depriving us as people of that. And I don't think that opinion is unique to an atheist. I think that opinion is probably most religions who are neither Buddhist nor Islam, most people of any faith other than those two faiths who say Islamic fanatics destroying a Buddhist monument thousands of years old would say that's a mistake, that's a loss, that's something that we we're losing a part of our cherished human experience right there.
Exactly. Yeah. And Christians blowing up Muslim mosques or whatever, these kind of things you start looking, going, okay. And that's where I think both of us can see, you could go, okay, there's hypocrisy, right? Okay. You're a religious fanatic and you go and you kill abortion doctors, right? It's still thou shalt not kill, right? You don't go
Right.
kill people because they disagree with you and you don't like what they're doing, but they're looking at the greater good. They go, look, I took out one life and they're saving millions of lives or thousands of lives. But you're still not a nice person by doing that, right? And so I think it's really a people. What I'm getting at is there's always gonna be fringe of any group you're in, right? You start a group and you see how it happens on Facebook. People, oh, I'm keto. They're like, oh my gosh, you're not carnivore. Oh my gosh, you're a sinner, right? And then all these people get all worked up because someone had a little broccoli with their steak one day or something like that, and it's just amazing how I've just been intrigued by this whole thing because before recent years, the Christians we were like the world champions of hypocrisy. And now I look and I go, wait, it's everywhere now. Like we're dropped to like 14th place, I think, last I checked. Because it's like you go, this is hypocrisy. Like you're telling me not to drive my car and you're flying around the world in jets all the time and you're eating the fanciest restaurants and you're telling me to eat crickets, right? And you're having a steak. Come on now, guys. So, it's one of those things like, do you believe what you believe or you don't, right? Ultimately. And I think it's just so amazing. The hypocrisy that we see, and it's like, oh, I believe in freedom of speech, but oh, this guy's too dangerous to talk. Like, you can call for genocide. That's okay. As long as you don't act on it. But I can't tell you, hey, you might want to love your neighbor. Oh my gosh, people might start doing that.
Right.
That would be
That
dangerous, wouldn't it?
it is crazy. And I know I grew up seeing the world through a Christian lens. And of course, the hypocrisy of Christianity was more evident to me than the Christianity of any other faith. And so right now in the world, boy, does that Eastern Orthodox Christianity look a lot better than a lot of religions right now. They seem to be getting a lot of things right, focused on family, etc. But I'm sure it's my ignorance of history that makes me not aware of whatever hypocrisies lurk in that, as there are hypocrisies that lurk within atheism. That we we're complicated creatures. We can't escape our hypocrisies. I'm not suggesting that any faith is free of hypocrisy, but I do believe that in every faith there are people who have adopted that faith unhypocritically. I believe there are people who are sincere about it, and I think that's laudable. I mean, from my perspective, I think the point of life is for you to have joy. And the point of society is for there to be human flourishing. Anything that furthers human flourishing and individual joy is good, in my opinion. But of course, you could come up with those things. Not anything that does that is good inherently, but those outcomes are good. And I like things that drive us toward those outcomes. I like things that drive us toward those outcomes in whatever context we happen to be in. And that changes from place to place and time to time.
Man, I think what happens is, and I think this is part of it when back to the initial question you were asking, is people don't want to be singled out. They don't want to stand out in the crowd. They don't want to be the one saying, wait a minute, guys, this doesn't seem right. Right. That's why you have mob mentality when they were hanging people and stuff, because once you get the mob involved, it's going to be bad. You get some bad ringleaders and people go, okay, he said to do it. Let's follow orders. Right. And I think that's what we've seen. And once you follow those orders, now it's hard to step back and go, I followed those orders. Like, and you look at it like, I want to say, I want to say that in Nazi Germany, they were all atheists that just didn't care, or devil worshippers that wanted to kill people. And we go, okay, there were a lot of good Christians there that did the wrong thing, right? They somehow were able to compromise their value system in order to do horrendous things, right? And you go, how did that happen? If you believe one thing, like how, and this is where I say, okay, there's judgment that has to fall at some point. If you're a pastor and you're molesting your flock, you're supposed to be their spiritual leader. If you're a doctor and you're doing terrible stuff like that, like these doctors that were with the Olympic team, the gymnastic team that were molesting all these girls, like there has to be a penalty at some point. Like you can't preach one thing and say you're trying to help people and then harm people and then walk away scot-free, and so I think there's a lot of stuff, and I think it's the same mentality. If you look at what happened, people were very quick to say, okay, as an example, you're unvaccinated, you can be locked up in camps. You need to be, you're not going to get medical care. You're not, and it's like, okay, you've just marginalized an entire group of people who made a decision, right, of what they want to do. And they've looked at that, or they made their own personal decision, religious, whatever it is. It's amazing. We've stepped over some boundaries that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime, to say, and I know a bunch of nurses here in San Diego, they gave them religious exemptions and then they said, no, it can't happen anymore. And they fired them all. Right. And you go, oh, you gave it to them and then you took it away. It's going to be a problem for you guys down the road. Right. If we do believe in freedom of religion, not freedom from religion necessarily, right? Or freedom not to be religious. So I don't care. Do what you want to do as long as you're not harming me.
Yeah, the two things that came out of what you just said that leapt out of me. One, we're in the midst of what's called a healthcare crisis, and we're finding excuses to fire healthcare workers. On the face of it, you can tell we're not doing what we're saying we're doing. We're not really concerned about what we're pretending to be concerned about. If we're firing nurses in the midst of what's supposed to be a devastating pandemic, then we're clearly not concerned about human health. We're concerned about something else, and we're not saying what that is. And that's a shame. And the other point that I wanted to make, I lost sight of because I wanted to make sure and get that. That was so annoying to me that we were so patently dishonest with ourselves. Oh, the other one was Noam Chomsky. And I don't know if you know, if you're not, we left-leaning people have been quoting Noam Chomsky for decades. And for Noam Chomsky, the guy who helped give us the phrase manufacturing consent, the way in which government organizations, media organizations brainwash us, the population, into accepting things that we know are A, wrong, and very often B, counter to our own interests. We accept these things. And I remember this, for you're my age, so you remember 2001. You remember September 11th and the Department of Homeland Security and what it was like to go through airport security after that as opposed to before. And you know, as well as I do, that we lost something valuable there that wasn't taken from us by the collapse of the Twin Towers. That was shooting ourselves in the foot with defense measures that did not make anyone feel safer, and only made everyone's life harder, only to make us, and what was the point? To get us angry, geared up for a war against Iraq that had nothing to do with 9/11. That's a perfect example of how consent for something despicable is manufactured in the public through a program on the part of government. Perfect example. And I think, well, here's a perceptive critic in Noam Chomsky of how America is getting stuff wrong. They manufactured consent for a war in Iraq where there were no weapons of mass destruction based on a terrorist act that had nothing to do with it. That's terrible. Then Noam Chomsky comes along and he himself manufactures consent for discrimination against the unvaccinated by saying, well, if they can't go, they shouldn't be able to leave their homes. And if they can't eat, that's their problem. What? You just, he also talks about worthy and unworthy victims. He just categorized a whole class of people as unworthy victims. We're unworthy victims. We don't get to eat anymore because we don't share your enthusiasm for an experimental gene therapy. And
Could
I
you
know you're
imagine?
using particular language here to not get banned, and I'm sorry if you have to.
Oh
I
man,
won't
it's been happened
take
four
offense if you have
times
to.
on YouTube. I don't mind. YouTube's been wrong every time, by the way. I'll say that publicly. I spoke to, Peter McCullough, doctors who have all the charts of what they were seeing and they were telling the truth, and the science has come out to confirm what they were saying. And every time YouTube didn't, like, it's freedom of speech is about hearing stuff you don't like to hear. That's like me
Absolutely.
suppressing your voice. I go, I don't want anyone else to be atheist, so you can't come on my show. I don't want to talk to you, right? It's being fearful to go, okay, you and I are reasonable enough to go, okay, let people listen to our discussion. Go, yeah, I kind of agree with Brian more. Go, oh, Brian's out left field. Mike's got the right point here. I agree with Mike on this. Or you could agree and disagree on different points. I don't care. But the point is, we have
Absolutely.
to be able to come together and have a reasonable dialogue. And so when you start seeing these kind of all or none and dehumanizing people, because all of a sudden you can say, I could sit there as a doctor and judge every single patient that comes in the door. Because about 95% of what we're treating is lifestyle related, right? Oh, you exercise too much, you pull a hamstring. I'm not taking care of you. You caused that problem. Oh, you smoke and you got lung cancer. Okay, yeah, right. We could all judge each other on every dang thing, but all of us at some point are going to need medical care. That's just the bottom line. So you go, okay, let me live my life in a way like what you're talking about, this the lifestyle, and have fun and enjoy life, and try to stay away from us doctors as much as you can. But when you come to us, you want us to be able to be honest with you. This AB 2098, which enhanced my desire to get out of California, because if I can't give informed consent, then I'm violating my Hippocratic oath that I took. This says the first thing is, like, you have to discuss with the patients risk and benefit of anything I do. I can't just tell you the good thing. If I'm selling you a car, I have to be, hey, look, here's what I would do. What would you do if it was your mom? Here's what I would tell my mom. Here's what I told my mom. Here's what I told my friends. Here's what I told my kids. You know, I'm just being honest with you. You may disagree and do what you want to do, and there's ramifications, right? There is, like, oh, here's a risk and benefit. Anything. I can't do surgery and go, okay, I'm doing this heart surgery. There's no risk to it. There's risk. There's always risk. So anyone who's ever had surgery, you see this whole list of stuff. You're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I want to do this or not. But at least you could go, okay, it's worth it. If your knee's not
So,
hurting that bad, you don't get a knee replacement, but it's hurting you every day. You go, okay, then it's worth it now because I can't live life anymore.
right. I love that you're an actual physician who can answer this question to presumably to my complete satisfaction. If you're reviewing the risks and benefits of the COVID jab for a person, one that you could cover is the risk is if you don't get it, then I won't reach the 80% of my patients who get it so that I get a bonus at this. Is that a real insurance thing? I've heard claims that there are insurance provisions or other provisions that make it so that doctors were essentially financially incentivized to get as many patients as possible jabbed so that they could reap some financial rewards. And I hear that stuff and I think, well, I don't know that to be true. I'm going to file that away as something to be curious about, but I'm not going to repeat it because I don't know it to be true. Is it
Well,
true?
I can tell you it's factually correct, right? So you're, but not me, not me, and not the direct primary care because we're outside the insurance model. But yes, there's it's actually documented. I've seen the papers where if you get X number of percentage of your patients to get a colonoscopy, to get a certain vaccination, to be on a statin drug, if they're not on it. So what's happening with doctors, and trust me, I've had this discussion with doctors, is that okay, if these 20 people aren't going to do, they're going to screw me up for my bonus, I'll fire them. So for me as being an independent doctor, I love those doctors because they sent me a lot of patients that are great patients who are well educated because they're saying, look, I want someone just to be honest with me. Like every day I hear that. It's like, I can't be honest with my doctor because if I tell them I'm keto, they're going to flip out. Or I tell them I'm doing this, they're happy about my weight loss. How'd you lose 38 pounds? Oh, I'm doing low carb. Oh my God, you're going to die. Stop it. Like they don't understand. They haven't looked at the data. So why do you say that? What's going to kill me from that? Right. And so I think it's that. I think the more I've learned, like Jason Fung, one of my favorite quotes from him, I don't know if he came up with it or whether he just heard it somewhere, but he says, a lot of these theories people have make a lot of sense as long as you don't think about it very much. Right. Because as soon as you ask two or three questions to someone, you go, you have no idea what you're talking about, do you? Like, how do you, like, I don't know if you saw the guy in Canada, he's eating an apple, and this guy says, well, you're a right winger because of this. And he goes, oh, who says that? Tons of people say that. Well, who? Right. Fauci, you say this thing about masks. Well, what are you basing that on? And then you ban Peter McCullough, who every time he says, here's the study, here's the study, here's the
Right.
study, right? And this guy goes, we just know it's true. Well, how do you know it's true? Just like me, this like that's my thing with the atheists. I can't argue with you and go, if you go, well, Brian, why do you believe this? I'll go because the Bible says it. Well, I don't believe in the Bible. Okay, right?
Right.
If you don't believe in what I'm like, what I'm basing my life on, then I can't argue from that book that you don't believe in. But I can say, Mike, explain why this guy was a murderer. Now he's like helping all the kids in the underserved areas and doing all this crazy stuff. How does this happen, right? How do you have Saul DePaul and all these kind of things happen? How do you explain those things logically? Like, how do you go from being totally one way to seeing? Because I think what happens at some point, you go, let me be open. Like you said, the whole thing is about being open minded. Let me listen to you and not be threatened by you and go, yeah, that's a good point, right? Because for me, I think when I think from a Christian perspective, I've been in a lot of situations that are just like you see people just stumble and fall and get into bad situations, and you go, okay, for me, I look at, so for instance, I could say, okay, I'm in Vietnam and I meet some cute girl there. It's like my wife will never know, no harm, no foul. I could do what I want to do. There's no consequence to that. But for me, I realize, okay, there's a consequence. I have to answer to God for that. I have to my integrity and so how do you have morality without having some kind of consequence? For instance, as an example to that, there's no consequence. In LA, you break into a car, or San Francisco, look what their society has become because they say, well, we're not going to penalize you. Okay, then I'm going to break into cars and steal stuff because there's no penalty to me. Right?
Right.
There has to be some penalty. You have to have something that keeps you on the straight and narrow, unless you're just inherently decent. And I would argue overall my life that we're not inherently decent necessarily. We have to learn that because it's self-sacrifice. Because if you don't take something from you're cold, you steal someone's coat so you can stay warm. You go, okay, I can justify that because I was cold. But now that
Uh,
guy's cold because he doesn't have a coat.
yes, you're making a great point that I agree with you that we don't need to talk about what humans naturally innately are. I'm not sure. I mean, I agree. You're probably right. We're probably not innately decent people who look out for each other. We probably have to be socialized, trained in some way to do that. But I think what we have in history is a lot of examples of societies that do manage to do that successfully generation after generation. You socialize people in a way that makes them support each other and look out for each other, or you can socialize people in a way that makes them only look out for themselves, and you're going to get a different society. And I think that's the society that we've built and that we're in the process of creating right now, much to our own detriment. Even those of us who are looking out entirely for ourselves are going to discover that society works better when we think about the other people involved. That there's it's the penalty. I mean, you think about a penalty, and in terms of breaking into a car, you could think of a fine or a jail term or et cetera. But the real penalty is unhappy people surrounding you in life do not make your life better. Unhappy, miserable, sick, unhealthy people are not assets to you in your universe at the bottom line. And there was a 3-word phrase you used that I jotted down because I didn't want to lose the point. Not be threatened. To not be threatened by a different worldview. That right there, which I think what you did was you stumbled on the thing the key point that I wish we would understand. If you can examine if you can examine an idea without being threatened by it, that is, without fear of what it's going to do to you, influencing your evaluation of it. Here's something someone's submitting to me. Is this true or not? I need to evaluate this not based on what sort of a threat it poses to some part of my identity. I need to evaluate it based on reality. Is it true or is it not? And if it is true and that's inconvenient for me, tough luck for me, and still thank you to this person who's telling me this thing, because I'd rather be correct. I'd rather know how the world really is than sort of hide away in my fears. And I think you and I are both huge fans of Ivor Cummins. We both knew about the Diamond Princess data very early. There was a fear that most people had about COVID that you and I did not share, because we had a real sense of this isn't that deadly a thing. It's not. We've got an experiment that it would have been illegal. You could not have gotten approval to conduct this experiment because it would have been considered too dangerous. But you've got a petri dish ship where things are happening, and we've got this information. And our media, instead of saying, hey, look, it looks like really it's only the elderly who are really at risk. We can see that not based on a computer model, based on a ship full of elderly people, we can say this is true. And so we let our fears, a lot of people let their fears run away from them. They got carried away by their fear. And then every decision got made as a consequence of that fear. And fear crushes anxiety. Fear crushes curiosity.
And it crushes critical thinking. Okay, what are my odds? Like
Yes.
I would sit with people and go, here's your odds of dying, right? If you're over 80 and you get COVID and you're just an average person, your chance of survival is 94% based on that, what we were seeing at that time. If you're in your 20s, it's 99.9x chance of survival. And you're going to live yourself in fear. Like that's what it is, though. But when you said that, people get upset with you because they're like, that's not what CNN and Fox News are saying, right? They're like, we're all going to die. They think the mortality rate was 80% of people died when they got it. You go, that's not what the reality. And now we're seeing as a result, and we can put whatever cause we want, but there's no doubt we're seeing, 18 to 35-year-olds skyrocketing death rate. So now, for the first time in my that I can remember in modern times, our longevity went from 79 to 76. That's not from 86-year-olds dying, because that would make that exactly. So you start realizing, oh, we got a problem, guys. Is it because of drug use and depression and anxiety, and we're killing each other? And maybe are these the results of separating people, not letting people like you and I sit down and have a reasonable discussion about things? Because I guarantee you, there's people who are going to listen and go, Brian's being way too reasonable with him, or Mike's being way too reasonable with this crazy Christian right winger. Right. And so going, okay, we kind of see it the same way. And like, that's what was amazing about you. We see so many things the same way. We may have a different reason, and gosh darn it. I'm going to try to move my patience down. Do you have like 10 or 15 more minutes?
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
There's a point I want to make. So yes.
Yeah, I want you to make that point. I'm going to send a text message to one of my cool patients. So I'm going to try to delay by 10 or 15 minutes because they put them right next to my darn podcast. But anyways, yeah. And I want to hear before, like, okay, let's hear your question or what you're going to say. And then I want to ask you about how your life has changed and what you're doing, like, professionally now.
Okay. Well, actually, that all folds in.
All right. Perfect, man.
Part of this is when you use those 3 words, not be threatened. It's the ability to contemplate something without letting fear taint your judgment. That's what it is to look at something without being threatened. And you went from what I think is, I think you've recently gone through what had to be a very scary period for you and your wife when you left the California system. And I nothing but praise for you for leaving that California madness, for just to or maybe not leaving it, but to set up the Arizona as a satellite. That move, if you had focused only on what was scary about it, if you had focused only on what was threatening, you would never have made it. But you did make it. You thought, you know what? There are some vulnerabilities of mine that will be exposed with this transition, but I'm going to face and overcome those vulnerabilities. And yeah, it was inspirational to me. I have had a job where I've been a subcontractor. I work in an industry where I've been a subcontractor for a number of years. And I thought, well, look at Brian Linskus. He's saying that, standing up to the
That
whole
crazy,
medical
that
system.
crazy Christian guy did what?
Yeah, look at that doctor. He's standing up to that system. And instead of being in a system that makes him the employee, instead of being a part of a system that makes him an employee who has to follow a bunch of rules he doesn't understand or agree with, he's going to strike out on his own and get to be the doctor he always wanted to be. And I have always been, not always, I used to be a professor, but I'm now a subcontractor in education, or I used to be a subcontractor in education. And I did that for years the way the contractors wanted me to do it. They would hire me to go do this thing, and I would do it the way they wanted to do it. And I didn't think it was necessarily the right way. And I thought, and I got a lot of great feedback, and people wanted me to do it, but I was terrified. I was going to have to make my own materials. I was going to have to do a lot of things differently. And if I had focused on what was threatening about that change, I wouldn't have made it. I would have just continued to suck it up. I'd still be a subcontractor. But I focused on what was exciting about it, and I did a real assessment of the likelihood of success. And I was right. The success is real. And we've now moved on into a new phase in our lives. And my wife and I are running the business now. And what I used to do, there used to be a whole travel department that handled me. I used to fly all over the country. And now I'm mainly driving around Texas. And my wife and I are able to do the thing I used to do. And it is very much a consequence, not a direct consequence of just you. You were an example, but you're an example of someone who said, I want to change the way I'm doing things, and I'm not going to let fear keep me from doing that. And I believe, so the point I'm trying to make here is what I think we could take from our differences of opinion. What unites us? Don't let fear control your decision making. Just refuse to let fear control your decision making. That's, I guess, I didn't realize that's what I wanted to say to you until you used that not be threatened phrase. But now I think it is what I wanted to say to you.
Man, using all this common sense stuff is going to win some people over to your side, man. I got to try to intervene here. Yeah, but that's true. Fear, I'm telling you, I was in a practice where I was working my butt off, working tons of hours. Who influenced me? Jason Fung. Like all these people that I'm talking about, that's why they're my heroes. They really did save my life because I was getting burned out. I was busting my butt. I wanted to help patients, but I was so hostage to the system. I go, this is ridiculous what we're doing, guys. Like you're making me click all these buttons and do all this crazy stuff. I want to take care of patients, but I'm spending 3 hours at the end of the day writing notes and like arguing with insurance on why my patient needs something. I need out of this ship, right? So I jump ship. Scary. Like for me, I say faith. Without faith, I go, okay, God, if you're leading me this way, I'm doing it, right? You have more courage than I do because you did it on your own and go, okay, I'm looking at the risk and benefit, right, of doing this. Like, okay, I'm taking financial risk. My wife goes, Brian, get out. Right. And then what happened is the reason Arizona became on my radar was I'm like, oh, I'm reading stories about doctors who were factually correct in what they were saying, factually correct based on the science, and the medical board is going after them and putting them under investigation indefinitely. When you're under investigation, they go, you can't practice medicine because you're under investigation. They go, okay, no problem. I'll just go to Texas. I'll go to Austin. Then you apply to Texas or you apply to Arizona and they say, oh no, are you under
You're under
investigation anymore?
investigation.
We can't
Yeah.
take you. Sorry. Once you clear that up, and then they could take their sweet time and then you're screwed. So for me, it was a logical going, okay, it's not because I wanted to change what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing. In my practice, I built over since 2020 during COVID, right? But you go, the risk outweighs the benefit to me now. right? You have made it to a point where you pass AB 209, which has since been repealed because it was unconstitutional anyways. But to say, doctor, you're going to have to violate your Hippocratic oath in order to keep your medical license. I'm like, okay, then I won't practice medicine, or I'll go somewhere where I can stick to the Hippocratic oath. And all the doctors who compromise on that, there's got to be a penalty. There's going to be a penalty. At least, even if there's not, in your brain, you know you did wrong, right? You know, because you didn't question it. Because patients would ask me, doctor, what are the long-term effects of this? Like, I don't know. How can I know the long-term effects on something that is brand new? If you buy a new car and you go, okay, can you guarantee me it's going to run for 20 years? No, I can't, because no one's had the car for 20 years. I can't guarantee that. But everyone else guaranteed what they didn't know. And that's when you lose credibility. Because if I could tell you, oh, 100% sure, I'll go, okay, what about cholesterol? Let's see what Dave's study shows. Let's see if Sean Baker keels over of a heart attack from eating red meat every day all the time, right? And you go, oh, he looks like he's doing pretty well. And all these people will say, well, what he's doing is dangerous and crazy. And then they're, not taking care of themselves and they're sick all the time. So it's like one of those darn things where you go, again, like what you did, you assess the risk and you assess the benefit and you go, okay, I don't know the benefit necessarily. Like when you left, you could have, like, no one maybe wanted to work with you, but like you said, all these doors open and people that I thought would never amount to anything were huge helps to me, right? Like people that you just were friends with and you go, oh my gosh, they opened the door for me, or they connected me somewhere, right? And it works out.
Yeah, I didn't fill in these dots when we talked before the interview, but yeah, my next door neighbor is a UT law professor, and she's just my neighbor. And you have talked to me about how important it is to you and your wife to be on good terms with your neighbors, and of course, my wife and I want to be on good terms with all our neighbors. We didn't befriend this woman because she was a UT law professor. We befriended her because
She was a
she's
nice
our
person.
neighbor,
Yeah.
and we treat her great because we want our both my wife and I want our parents to be treated great by their neighbors. That's what we want. That's why we want to treat our neighbors great, especially if they're older, because we want our parents to be treated great by their neighbors. It's just karmic hope. It's not that we think that by doing it we cause it to happen, but it does so happen that both of our parents, my wife's mother and my parents, are treated great by their neighbors. And so it feels great to us to treat the elderly in our neighborhood that way. And we didn't do that with some ulterior motive. And yet, when I got to a point that intellectual property became a huge contention, a huge problem for me, and no matter how much I thought about it or how much work I put into it, I wasn't going to be able to get past this choke point. And I was thinking, oh, I gotta get my job back. I don't know how to do this. All I had to say was, hey, you know anyone I could talk to about this? And it's my neighbor coming through for me saying, oh, well, that's easy. It turns out that my boss works in intellectual property in the exact area you're concerned about, and I can get her to become your lawyer at a discount. And that's where the movement comes through. And that's a person I didn't know, the new lawyer, as a friend of a neighbor, that if I were too busy being fearful, if I were too busy being hateful, being selfish, looking only out for myself, what's in it for me to take care of my neighbor? If I were too busy being selfish, that door wouldn't have opened itself to me. So there's no doubt in your Christianity and my atheism both lead to the conclusion that kindness to the people around us is great. It's a great thing to do. It pays dividend. You shouldn't do it because it pays dividends. You should do it because it should feel great to you to be kind to people. But when you are, don't be surprised when great stuff happens to you.
So everyone, what Mike's saying is that God opens doors for you if you're nice to your neighbors and be a kind, decent person. So Mike, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. No, man, it's such a it's there's certain people like you. When I had Jason Fung and Ben Bickman, I keep looking at the clock going, oh my gosh, my patient was nice enough to say, no problem, doc. It was 15 minutes later. But I'll tell you, loving your neighbor, like you said, like my neighbors, I'll tell you, going back, one of the worst times, that was huge faith building for me, was we went at my old practice, our office manager embezzled $500,000. And all of a sudden I think, oh, you have no money. It's coming for a while and all this stuff. And so I called my wife. I go, hey, okay, here's what we're gonna do. Like, you have to be reasonable. You can't panic. I go, okay, cancel cable, cancel the kids' music lessons, cancel this, cancel that, cancel this. We don't need cable. And it was one of the best times of our lives. But The better thing would that happen is I got home that day. My neighbor met me in the driveway. He goes, "Hey, I heard what happened." He had his checkbook. How much do you need? My atheist neighbor, by the way.
Hmm.
How much do you need? Right?
Well, that's
My
a nice
Christian
story,
friends go,
man.
you know what? The school that my kids were in, they go, we love you guys. You guys have been like helped the school. You've done so much stuff. Tuition's free until you can afford it. Guess what? I never had to miss a payment on that. Everything worked out. But you realize, what do you really need? And the happiest times, like we were just talking about the other day with my kids. I go, that Christmas we had no money, but man, we had a blast. We played games every day. We spent time together. You do this because you could get so lot caught up in the moment, like Christmas, that I'm going to get this out before Christmas. Um, the Christians forget what it's about. It's about presence and whatever, and you forget, like, hey, it's about loving your neighbor, loving your friends. And that's why I love a guy like you who could screw up my paradigm and I could screw up your paradigm a little bit, hopefully, right? And you start going, okay, maybe he's not as crazy as like I thought, right? And I think it's so important because you came to my I don't know if you remember this. You came to I said in the middle of the lockdown, I said, hey, keep the hope, keep the faith, things are going to get better. And I got attacked for 3 freaking days about that. And I'm like, how can people attack you for saying things will get better? Because they wanted to live in fear, and people benefit if you're in fear because you make dumb decisions. You get diagnosed with cancer, all these people go, oh, I have a cure here. It's going to cost you $300,000 and I could save your life. Well, it's worth $300,000 to save my life, right? So
Right.
fear, and instead of sitting back and go, okay, what's your success rate? How many people have lived? How many people, what are you doing? But when you're in fear, you don't think. If you're in a fire and you're in a building and you're in the top floor and the alarm goes off, you don't jump out the window automatically. You assess and go, oh, did someone burn toast in the microwave? Or is there flames going around me? Right. If you're on the first floor, you go, okay, I'll just jump out the window or leave the door. But if you're you have to use critical thinking. And I think that's the thing I love about my atheist friends is they use critical thinking and go, this just doesn't make sense to me. And we could have the same discussion and go, okay, it doesn't make sense to me as a scientist, as a doctor, seeing the intricacies of the human body, how I can move my hand and do all these things, and I can, change lives and influence. It doesn't make sense to me that that happens by chance. That there's not a creator. Like if I see a truck in the middle of the desert, I don't go, oh, that probably just randomly like the wind blew and made a truck. It doesn't work that way, right? To me, logically, I go, it doesn't make sense. So how can we have the most intricate, the greatest mind that can do the greatest things, that can to save lives and be kind and decent and loving and humane, but also that same mind can go and kill people and cause like live your whole life to destroy lives and to go after people who disagree with you, and instead of saying, hey, Mike seems like a pretty decent guy. I think I want to hear what he has to say and how does he get through life and what's his philosophy. Because some people are going to ascribe to your philosophy and some are going to ascribe to mine. And I pray and I really do hope that at the end God goes, hey, look, Mike, if there is a God, right? If I believe this,
Right.
man, you've been a good guy and you did. What do you think? Do you think all this stuff that this crazy Brian guy was saying was true or not? Right? I'm gonna give you another chance if you want. I think that's what I think is like being a just person. That's what I would think that God would do. I would hope and go, look, because for me, I look at the cross and this guy was dying and he goes, hey, I believe what you're saying. He didn't say get off the cross and go save lives and do all this good stuff. He goes, okay, you believe, you're in, you're good,
Right.
right?
Right. No.
He didn't do anything. So I would like to believe that. That's what I like to believe. But then I think there's other people who they're going to go, oh, did you see what you did? All these people. Did you see all these lives that you knew we have the emails of that you knew these things were going to happen and you did nothing, right?
Mm.
So yeah, I think there's I don't know. We'll see. One of these days we'll see, right? Hopefully
Right.
not for a while, but but I think part of it is living your life like being a decent, kind person like you are, and that's how those doors open too. Like you can open those doors and. But when you see enough coincidence, you go, maybe there's something to this. When I'm sitting down talking to Jason Fung, I'm like, how the heck am I talking to Jason Fung and Ben Bickman and Professor Noakes, Gary Fetke, all these heroes of my life, and I get to sit down and talk to them and interview them. And guys like you that I can go, oh, I love spending this time. It's amazing. It's amazing when we see humanity and not divide each other. Go, oh yeah, but he's this. Like he's that. Oh, he believes this. Like you can't be his friend. No, one of my best friends in the world is like what are the opposites? I went to USC, he went to UCLA. He's liberal, a Muslim liberal. I don't understand that. Anyways, we love each other still. We're friends, and we get along. We'd say, oh, you're wrong on this, and here's why. And he could tell me, you don't understand our customs. Here's how it works. And I go, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I know why the hostage situations and all these things happen. You go, oh, okay, that's the mentality of what people are saying. Whether it's right or wrong, that's what you know, right? So I have to ask you now that you're doing all these crazy things and jumping out in faith, right? And God's opening doors for you. What's life's best medicine for you, Mike?
Well, I don't want to give the same answers last time, and I prepared a different answer for
Look
this
at that.
time.
You're like, no
That
one knows. They're like, when I have someone back, they're like, I don't know what I said last time. Isn't that amazing? That's the amazing thing about I love it because people, I don't know. What may
right. Oh, I saw that
it's
happening with Ben
changed.
Bittman. I love Ben Bittman's answer on the most recent answer as well. Just to reiterate his take your duties seriously, but not yourself. What a great answer.
Yeah.
Take your duties seriously, but not yourself. I can get on, I'm not a Mormon, but I can get on board with that. And the thing I wanted to talk about, but it takes too long, is to sing the praises of my wife and the importance of having someone in your life, not necessarily a spouse. I don't want to sound dismissive of people who have lost their spouses. I know a lot of people who have, and they don't want to remarry, and I understand. I'm not saying you need to have a spouse at all times, but if you are fortunate enough to have a spouse, remember that when it's difficult to live your life, you can live your life for your spouse. Remember, when it's difficult to live your life for you, you can always live your life for your spouse. And that will help you find your way to reconnecting, to finding some sense of purpose. But the story to illustrate that takes too long to tell, and I'm keeping your patient waiting. So I want to seize on the last thing you said that I thought was great,
Oh
which was
yeah.
the
Now
happiest point of your life was when you cut the cord, got rid of cable, got rid of that cable. Life's best medicine could very well be stop watching TV, stop consuming corporate media. That's the quick way, just to, because I know you can take it from there and you could work on it in other episodes, and we don't have to keep your patient waiting any longer. But yes, please tell the story the next time you can of what was so great about cutting the cord, because for us, not watching TV has been central to our sanity.
man, that's I can't give any better advice than that because both sides. I see propaganda on all sides. Like, there's so much. I wish we had like 6 hours to talk. Man, I'm looking for part three already. Let's do this thing. I want to hear it. Write that down. Tell me your story about your wife because I think that's so critical. And I'll tell you, my wife's a huge blessing in my life, and it gives me joy and peace. And I go, you know what? If I can go home to my wife and kids, and like this morning, as a matter of fact, it's funny. I woke up and I'm like, there's a sticky note next to my bed. I'm like, what is this? My 24-year-old daughter said, "Hey, Dad, just want to let you know I love you and respect you, and I thank you for everything you're doing." I'm like, my first thought's like, I better go check my car. Maybe she hit my car on the way last night, or we did an okay job raising her, right? So
Right.
you start looking at that, and ultimately, that's what it's about. If you lose your self-respect and your integrity, you're in trouble, man. I don't care if you're religion or whatever. You lose your integrity and your self-respect and your love for other people, like you're wasting your time.
Right.
And you prove that too. So,
And
so
nothing will help you do that as much as turning off the TV. I'm just bringing it back to my
yeah, I think that's so true. You can be so distracted and so annoyed. Like, really, the TV, there's so much evil that can come out of
distracted
it
and annoyed and polarized.
and
That's the other
polarized.
thing the TV
And you
does.
see what every commercial is going to be about, and they're going to try to
Uh,
get you to eat food. And then they say, we got the drug to fix that problem when you eat all that bad food. And like, you could do whatever you want, and there's no consequence, and we'll just fix it with drugs. And also, it's just that brainwashing that we've all been under. And when you start going, oh my, am I the, how many times it both of us as, thinking from a critical thinking standpoint, go, am I the crazy one here? How can this possibly be where people are saying like all lives don't matter? If you say all lives matter, every life matters, then you say, well, that's controversial. This guy's a right winger. He's crazy. It's like, does my Muslim friend's life not matter? Does my Jewish friend's life not matter? Does my atheist friend's life not matter? Like, clearly you're making an impact on your community and your profession and all that you're doing. So, man, it's always a pleasure. I'm so glad. I'm sorry for everyone expecting the Jerry Springer show here. We just let you down again. Maybe on episode 3 we could really go at it. What do you
I
think,
look
man?
forward to that, Brian. Thank you, Frank.
All right, man. Guy in Austin. How do people find you if they want to track you down?
I'm on Twitter at Guy in Austin. I stopped doing the YouTube stuff when they did all the censorship nonsense. So I the difference there to quickly, I'm sorry, I know we need to wrap it up, but a lot of people are confused. Why did I abandon YouTube and yet stay on Twitter? It gets back to human connections. YouTube was about me creating content, and I don't want to create content for the censorship industrial complex. And Twitter is about staying in touch with people, and I think human connections are vital. So that's why I'm still on Twitter at Guy in Austin, Guy in Austin. And I look forward to hearing from anyone. I follow people who I follow back because I'm interested in discussions, and I'm very accessible.
Man, thanks for all you're doing. And like business wise, I mean, you're doing private contracting work, I assume, right? Not like public stuff.
And it is. I work with school districts all over the country, but primarily in Texas right now.
All right, cool. Well, people can track you down. Thanks for joining, man. It's always a pleasure. And we'll look for episode number 3 coming up, man. Let's do this thing.
All right,
You
man.
have an
Thanks very
open
much. Thanks for having
invitation.
me.
Hey, great seeing
Always a
you.
pleasure talking to you, Brian.
And everyone, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, like talk to other people, hear their perspective, like start to understand like how where they want to go in life and what they're trying to do and be around like Mike said so astutely is like if you're around negative, difficult people, you're going to be negative and difficult. You're around kind, decent, uplifting people, surround yourself with good people, you know. And if you've done wrong, like make it right. Yeah. If you see stuff that's unjust, like be the person who stands up and go, wait, everyone else sees it this way. Here's how I see it. It's okay. You know, we can't just give into what society says all the time. Sometimes you have to think for yourself and think critically and say, okay, let me just not act out of fear. So there's so much wisdom here. You can go and listen. It is awesome. So, so glad to be able to share this with you. And thanks to my sponsors, you know, for making these things possible. And thanks to Mike for always supporting me, man. Even though I'm talking about all this nutty Christian stuff over here, like he's been a huge support of the podcast and always encouraging and listening to my nuttiness. So, Mike, hey, that says a lot about you and your integrity. So, thank you, man.
Well, thank you. And you do not have to be a Christian to get a lot out of the Life's Best Medicine podcast. It's a great show, Brian. Thank you.
All right, man. I'll send you the check.
All right, man. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information. And hopefully this helps you. You know, have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.